There we are. Hey guys, and welcome to the Photopoetry Mentorship presented by me, P. Smith Aesthetics. Once again, I would like to extend my gratitude to the Thomas Terry Trust for entrusting me with this opportunity. I am forever grateful. Thank you so much. And yes, to P. Smith Aesthetics, myself, of course, for doing this. Welcome to the month of August. This is the first week, and we are going to be speaking or doing a basic introduction to the elements of poetry, right? So, the elements of poetry. The first question being, can a poem be consumed the same way as an image? My answer to that would be yes and no. See, a poem can be consumed the same way as an image. So, how, you may be asking? This is how. Poetry is an art form that is audio and visual. Meaning to say, before we can hear a poem, one has to visualize it in their mind. But before we can even have them visualize it in their mind, they can have to write it down. So before we hear a poem, they have to write it down. So before they can even write it down, they have to visualize it in their mind. I am rambling and fumbling. I don't know what it is. So this visualization may occur in various forms, from being sounds that are being heard and being images which can be seen in their mind's eye. So when a poem then is penned down or when it is written, this is the actualization of what the poet has envisioned in their mind. The same can also be said or applied to photography. Personally, I am inspired by Ansel Adams, who, in his creation of photography, would first create the image in his mind's eye. This form of seeing beforehand what the image will look like before you take it. Listen, I take nothing from point and shoot photographers, but this form of photography, I would not classify it as photo poetry because I believe you'd have to first see the image in your mind's eye before you go and do. When it comes to the consumption of poetry and photography, there is a slight difference, however. Whilst an image is easily interpreted by the mind's eye, a poem may take more time and a little bit of training. What do I mean? It is no lie that an image can evoke emotion the moment you immediately see it. But with poetry, it's going to take a bit of decoding. You need to understand the tone in which the poet speaks or writes. You also need to decode their choice of words. So that is what we call diction. In photography, this is done beforehand. So the poet will do that for you so that when you read or when you see the image, it's already presented in a way that speaks to you. For example, this can be done through their choice of color, that is black and white or just color, or how they would show or frame the image for you in a manner that is subjective to the environment which surrounds the image. It, however, stands that as art forms, the two share similar traits. So I would then like for you at this point to highlight on similar traits which are between photography and poetry, which I may not have spoken of in this part of the presentation. So I hope you're listening and I hope you are catching up. Thank you. So moving on, the relationship between poetry and photography is best described by the cliche phrase which we are all too familiar with, which goes as a single image is worth 1,000 words. A single image is worth 1,000 words. It is no lie that an image can evoke emotions when it is presented. So now, when you're looking at an image, I am presuming that when this person uttered these words, they might have encountered an image which they could not describe with enough words in that moment. So they just ended up saying a single word, a single image is worth 1,000 words, which is quite clever, I say. So um, I'm going to give you an example of how photography and poetry can be used together to create a more powerful and evocative experience. For example, a photograph of a flower can be used to evoke the beauty and fragility of nature, or even human life itself. A poem that is speaking about a flower altogether can explore the same themes in a much more deep way than exploring these topical themes, such as how fragile life can be and the meanings of emotion. I want you to think of a flower. If I am to see a flower as a photographer, how am I going to capture that image? What kind of light am I going to use to expose for that image? And when then I take that image, how am I going to frame it? Meaning to say, am I going to make it stand out as a big canvas, as a big image which covers the whole frame, or I'm going to make sure that it is quite small with a big environment surrounding it. All this, I am thinking about it beforehand so that when I present to you the image, I cannot speak of fragility when an image is big and covering the whole space of the frame. But when I want to present it as a fragile being, I will present it in a manner that says this is a small flower and this is a big environment around the flower. Therefore, that speaks to the fragility of life, the evocative emotions. So I'm trying to paint to you now the image that then comes from speaking and capturing an image, and then using it in a way that speaks poetic to the voice of fragility. And then we are moving on to the other part now, which is to what extent can a poem be used or an image be used to to what extent can a poem be an image and vice versa? This question now, I would like you to pause and think on for a moment. I would like you to go back to your understanding of what a poem is and also how you understand a photograph to be. Because now, in my research, I've often found that the definition of a poem is quite subjective. And depending on how you're going to present or how you're going to use the image that is there, it is subjective. So that's why even if you see here in this whole presentation that we're going to do, I shy away from giving a meaning of a poem. I just try and make it as or an assumption of you understand what a poem is. The reason being the definition of poetry is quite subjective. When it comes to photography or to defining an image, it may not be as subjective, but still, I'm going to not give the definition of my own, as I'm going to allow you to come up with your own definition, because this also can be subjective. But I want this then to be used in a manner that speaks to you. So that's how I want this to be done. So this then, I want you to give me your own definition of how then you would describe the relationship between a poet and an image and how one can be another. How can you look at an image and think to yourself, ooh, this is poetic? And also, how can you listen or read a poem and think to yourself, ooh, if this were to be an image, I would capture it or present it in one, two, three, and four ways? So that's an open-ended question. I would like for you to give your own definition to that. And then moving on, is there anything in a poem that you would consider to be photographic, or in other words, visual? So these are now a few notes that I'm going to give to you that are going to help you identify a poem, and then think along the lines of this poem is then photographic. So when you're listening or when you're reading a poem, I want you to think of the imagery that is presented in that poem. When the poet speaks of a cold winter's night in the middle of June, um, the the wind the air crawling within my blankets like a ghost. I want you to think of such words or such expressions and imagine how they evoke images for you to present this. And then if you are to present an image, how would you given that information, right? And also the emotion that is presented within your poem. If you are to be presented with a poem, the kind of emotion that it brings, how then are you going to use that emotion in a manner that speaks to a photograph? As you can see in this presentation, I've given you two images that I've taken of myself, of a self-portrait. I want you to think of the emotion that is presented in these two images. The first one being of me with the face completely covered. How does that image make you feel? And if you were to write a poem, what would it say? Right? And going on to the next point of how a poem can then be used to create an image, it's in how the poem is presented. If I am to present a poem to you, how would that poem be classified so that it can be an image? Meaning to say, this then goes to the gestures that I make while I'm making this poem for you. This also goes to my my tonal variations when I'm presenting this poem to you. This also speaks to the fact of if a poem is presented or written as a ballad, if it is written as a lyric, if it is written as a Shakespearean sonnet, all these presentation methods, how can you take that to create an image, right? And then another note that I would like for you to take down is there anything in a photograph that you would use to create a poem? I'm gonna give the two images that I've presented for you here as examples. Looking at these images, how would you use them? First, looking at the texture. It is quite textured, as even looking at image number one, with image number one being as textured as it is, with how the face is covered, with how there is a dark background. How would you use such textures to create a poem? Even with such textures available to you, what kind of a poem would that be? Right? And also, another point being, when you look at an image, what kind of colors are presented forward? So, this then speaks to how we interpret color or how we view color as human beings. A color red is quite passionate, where the color black is quite somber and sad. The color white is pure. So now, when you're presented with an image that is colorful, red, yellow, immediately we're going to expect you to write a poem that is cheerful, right? But with my personal taste, I like dark images. I like something somber. Then we are speaking to darkness, black and white. I call it my own personal taste, which is monotone. So now, when you're presenting a photograph that is monochromatic, what kind of a story are you presenting? Personally, if you go onto my website, my work is specific to characters such as sadness, trauma, PTSD, rape, um, all those emotional setbacks. That is the kind of photography that I do. So I want them to then think of, if you're to capture an image, what kind of emotion is the colors going to bring? And then, of course, the emotion within the image. Emotion, basically, for me, I would like to see it in such a way as within the first 5 minutes, in fact, the first 5 seconds of seeing an image, that aha moment, that wow, that you experience when you see an image, I want you to use that in how you present your poetry, right? So those are some of the few notes you can take down with regards to the question of to what extent can a poem be an image and vice versa. Now we move on to my own inspirations. I would like then for you to give then your own inspirations within the platform as to who inspires you, both as a poet and as a photographer. Personally, I am inspired by Ansel Adams. I am also inspired by Danny Bittencourt, whose work is mainly on what do you call it? Whose work is mainly on hybrid photography, and she's written books about it. I would encourage you to read that. And my own personal mentor, Peter Haroff, whose work is quite big in nature photography, the likes of landscape photography, and all those works. And now also Martin Osner, whose works is in art. The It's the interconnectedness of photography and painting and the art of expression. I would encourage you to also check out his works. It's Martin Osner on YouTube, Facebook, also on Google. It will lead you to the Martin Osner Gallery. And when it comes to photography, my inspirations come from so profound. Arnold. Um, his work is so inspired to such an extent that when you sit down to listen to his work, he takes you on horseshoe where he allows you to self introspect. So he leads you down one path only to turn you and for you to face yourself and think to yourself, oh my goodness, I need to improve, or I need to work on myself. So he is my biggest inspiration when it comes to poetry. And also my biggest, also like my favorite poem of all time has to be Desiderata by Max Ehrmann, where he says, go placidly amidst the haste of life. I would encourage you to read that also and go through that. But yeah, this then brings us to the end of this presentation, where we are saying, now we have explored the elements of poetry, where we are speaking on the relationship of, can a poem be consumed the same way as an image? This then is being open to you guys. I need your feedback. What do you think would be a poem that can show the relationship between a poem and an image, and what is the relationship between poetry and photography? And That's that. And also, I also spoke on my inspirations. I would truly appreciate it if you brought in your own inspirations with regards to poetry and photography. And let's do this. So that's your task for this week. I would like for you to just respond to those questions, and then that'll be that. We'll meet again next time when we're going to speak on the elements of photography and the basics of photography, what one can call a photo poetic and all that. That will be for the next week, and then the other week that will be that, and then we'll be done with the month of August. If you have any questions, feel free to send them onto the platform, and we will do this. But that brings us to the end of this session. Once again, thank you so much. My name is Takunda Shepherd. I am the brains behind P. Smith Aesthetics. And again, I just want to extend my gratitude to the Thomas Terry Trust for giving me this opportunity. And yeah, I am quite grateful to this. Thank you so much. Until we meet again for the next presentation, for the next week. You have a lovely weekend ahead of you. Thank you so much, guys, and ciao. Until we meet again next time, I always say, annihilate the status quo and always count your blessings. And until we meet again next time, ciao.